Hello everyone! Today we're going to finish up the logic for my baseball game. And if you missed the previous episode, you really should check that out before you watch this one, because we're going to pick up right where we left off. So last time we hooked up the logic for most of the core part of the game here with the challenge maker. We hooked up the logic for pitching and the logic for hitting. And that's where we left off. One logic connection I forgot to make last time is on the level starter here. On Catalyze, new logic connection on Catalyze. I want to close this first logic gate when the player enters the toy box, because we don't want any the player just wandering in here and dropping balls and doing anything in here without the game being active. Okay, so that's the one piece that I forgot last time. Alright, so last time we left off with the hitting, and I mentioned that this was the most difficult part. The base running was the most difficult part of the game, and hitting basically initiates that. So when the ball leaves this trigger area, the runner, the batter, is allowed to start running the bases. And the same logic needs to be used for both player 1 and player 2. And this is what took a long time to come up with all of this logic. So what we have is this logic gate here. This is on the logic diagrams labeled batter ID. This determines if player 1 is batting or player 2 is batting. And this is what's going to determine what happens at each of the bases. So when the ball leaves the trigger area, we made this logic connection last time, we attempt to input into this gate. If this logic gate is in the open state, that means player 1 is batting. If this logic gate is in the closed state, that means player 2 is batting. And so we can determine, and you'll see this on the logic connections for the trigger, we know when player 1 or player 2 steps on this. And we have two logic gates here set up, one for player 1, one for player 2. Okay, and that's the same at all the bases. So we've got player 1, player 2. We've got player 1, player 2, player 1, player 2. And so that's what's going to drive this. So initially, all of these logic gates, all 8 of them, 2 at each base, are going to be in the closed state. All right? And so to do that, just to make things easy, we're going to use this logic gate to do that. And on the logic diagrams, this is the end of bat logic gate. So this logic gate here, we're going to do a new logic connection on output. We're going to come to each of these logic gates and close them. Okay? Do that for all of the other 7 logic gates. Make sure they're in the closed state. So on output from this gate, close. Do that for the 2 at second base, the 2 at third base, and these 2 over here at home plate. Now the end of bat logic gate also needs to make sure all of the radar markers are turned off. And so this is also going to do new logic connection on output. Come over to each of the radar markers and deactivate them. Okay? And this is going to be invoked from a number of different places. So we have to do this at several stages during the game. So that's what this logic gate does. It closes all 8 of those logic gates for running the bases, and it deactivates all the radar markers. Okay? So that's what that does. Now, let me go back to an earlier diagram here. I'm going to make sure, yeah. So on the level starter, when the player first enters this toy box, we're going to do a new logic connection on Catalyze. We want to make sure this thing is done. So we're going to input into that gate. So when the player loads the toy box, we input into that gate. That's going to close all of those logic gates and deactivate all the radar markers. And that's really important. The other thing we should probably do, just to be safe, is on the challenge maker, you could also do a new logic connection on invites accepted. Also input into that. I don't believe I have that connection on my logic diagrams, but it doesn't matter. It's a safe thing to do. Okay, now with those initially in the closed state then, when the ball leaves this trigger area and passes through this logic gate, again, if this gate is in the open state, that means player 1 is batting. So on output, new logic connection on this logic gate on output. This is the batter ID logic gate. We're going to come over here to this first logic gate and open it. Okay, this is the one that's labeled on your diagrams, base 1 P1, base 1 player 1. This is base 2 player 2. Okay, so when player 1 is batting, that opens that logic gate. So if player 1 runs over here and steps on this, this will be in the open state, and we can do the logic that's there. If player 2 steps on this while they're fielding the ball, this is going to be closed and nothing will happen. Now, if the ball leaves this trigger area and player 2 is batting, this logic gate for batter ID is going to be in the closed state. And so we're going to do a new logic connection on this logic gate for batter ID. When input blocked, and this is broadcast when this gate is closed and something attempts to input into it, then we're going to open that gate. Okay? So depending on who's batting, one of these gates will become open, and only one. So only the player who's batting and running the bases is going to be able to score. The other player can step on these things all they want. They're not going to score. Okay? All right, so now on to first base. So this, as I said earlier, lets you know when player 1 or player 2 steps on it. So we're going to do a new logic connection on here. When stepped on by player 1, we're going to attempt to input into that gate. New logic connection when stepped on by player 2. We're going to attempt to input into that gate. Again, only one of these is going to be open. This is the one for player 1. So if player 1 is batting when they step on this base, the input signal will get through this logic gate. Excuse me. All right, so on this logic gate, several things need to happen. First, we'll do a new logic connection on output. We want to deactivate this radar marker, and then we want to activate the next one. So a new logic connection on output. We're going to come over here to second base and turn that one on. And on that logic gate, new logic connection on output. We're going to open this gate. So now when player 1 steps on here, this will be open and they can do what they need to do there. New logic connection on output. We want to go over to the scoreboard next. And we're going to increment by 1 the score for player 1. Because again, the rules in my baseball game are that whenever you step on a base, you get a point. And then the last thing we want to do is play a sound effect. And this is for the benefit of the defender. Because when they're chasing the ball, they kind of want to need to know where the player is. Hopefully they're not busy watching the other player who's batting. They're trying to field the ball. And so if we play a sound effect at each of the bases, that kind of lets the defending player know that the other player is making progress. So on this logic gate, new logic connection on output, we'll come over to our sound effect generator, and I'm actually going to input into this gate just to make this a little easier. And on this logic gate, a new logic connection on output. This logic gate on the diagrams is labeled safe. On output from there, we're going to come to our sound effect generator, and under the vocal category, the umpire is going to say safe. Do you really need this logic gate? No, but it's easier to do input into that than to try to do vocal umpire safe each time. Okay. And then this logic gate for player 2 is basically going to do all of the same things. The only difference is this is for player 2. So on this one, new logic connection on output. So for this one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to deactivate this radar marker. New logic connection on output. Turn on the radar marker for base number 2. New logic connection on output. We're going to open up the logic gate for player 2 over here at second base. New logic connection on output. We want to increment player 2's score. Increment by 1 the score for player 2. And a new logic connection on output. We'll play our umpire safe sound. So we'll input into that logic gate there. Okay. So it's basically the same thing. We're just opening up a different logic gate over here, incrementing a different score over there. And then the last thing we need to do is once the player has touched this base, we need to make sure both of these gates get closed, because we don't want the player just jumping up and down on this base and racking up their score. And we can key off of that on the radar marker. So a new logic connection on here, when this is deactivated, we're going to close both of these gates. Okay. And that's it for first base. Now, second base is basically the exact same thing. All right? There's really no difference. So, new logic connection, this is going to do the exact same stuff that the other one did. So when this is stepped on by player 1, we open this gate, or we input into this gate, or try to. When the trigger is stepped on by player 2, we attempt to input into this gate. And again, only one of these is going to be open after that player steps on player 1. So on output from this gate, you are going to turn off this radar marker. And on output from that gate, you're going to activate this one. And then on output from here, you're going to open this logic gate for player 1 over at this base. You're also going to increment the score for player 1 and play the umpire safe sound. For player 2, exact same thing. Deactivate that one, activate that one, open up this one for player 2, increment player 2's score, and play the umpire safe sound. For base 3, exact same thing. You're going to step on this for player 1. I keep the orientation the same. For player 1, you're going to open this gate, or input into this gate. For player 2, stepping on this, you're going to input into this gate. And each of these are going to deactivate this radar marker and activate the one at home plate. They're going to activate the corresponding gate here. Open this one for player 1, open this one for player 2. Increment player 1's score, increment player 2's score, play the umpire safe sound. Okay, so it's the same thing on each of those bases until you get to home plate. Home plate is a little bit different. So at home plate, there is no next base, so that simplifies some of the logic, but we have some other things we need to do instead. So at home plate, new logic connection at that trigger when stepped on by player 1. We attempt to input into this gate. New logic connection when stepped on by player 2. We attempt to input into this gate. And by the way, if I sped past second and third base a little too fast for you, I do have logic diagrams, complete ones for those both of those bases on my page, so make sure you look at those. But hopefully you understand what needed to happen at those. Okay, so for player 1, this logic gate here, new logic connection on output, first thing we want to do is deactivate this radar marker. And there is no next radar marker, so we don't have to worry about that. New logic connection on output. Next thing we want to do is come over to the action enforcer, and we're going to have player 1 celebrate, because they just got a home run basically. New logic connection on output. Come over to each of the party cannons and do a grand finale. Again, they got a home run, so we should celebrate. So make that same connection for the other 2 party cannons up there. New logic connection on output. We want to increment the score. Can't forget to do that. So we're going to increment the score by 1 for player 1. And this time, instead of playing the safe sound, let's do something a little snazzier. So on output, we'll come over to our sound effect generator, and we'll do our musical fanfare. So we'll play a little musical flourish. All right, player 2's logic gate, basically the same things. So on output, we're going to deactivate this radar marker. New logic connection on output. We'll have player 2 celebrate. New logic connection on output. We'll invoke all of our party cannons. Excuse me. New logic connection on output. We'll increment player 2's score. Increment by 1 the score for player 2. And then we'll play our little musical flourish. Okay. And there we go. So that is it for the base running. And that was the the most probably confusing part of this. Hopefully I made that easy to understand for you. But that's the most involved as far as the complexity of logic goes. But again, hopefully that's not too bad. All right, so the next part of this, now that we've taken care of the batter, is the defender. So the defender, after the ball is put into play and leaves that trigger area, their whole goal is to get that ball into this soccer goal as quickly as they can. And so the ball entering this is what's going to handle the outs and the defender's part of this. So on this soccer goal, a new logic connection, when a goal is scored by physics ball, first thing we're going to do is play a sound effect to let the runner know that they're out. So under the general category, we'll play the buzzer sound. All right, next thing we're going to do is a new logic connection. When a goal is scored by a physics ball, we're going to come over to our counter for the outs, and we're going to increment that by 1. Now we've already made the connection for this to reopen this logic gate for the pitching. We did that last time. Just looking at the diagram to make sure I got everything. On the soccer goal, new logic connection, when a goal is scored by physics ball, we're going to have the stadium stands cheer. So we'll input into our cheering logic gate. And I've already got this set up, I believe, to reactivate that trigger area. We did that last time. So the last thing this needs to do is a new logic connection. When a goal is scored by a physics ball, we need to input into our end of bat logic gate. And again, that is going to close all of the logic gates at the bases and turn off all the radar markers, because the player isn't allowed to score any more points. The batter isn't going to be able to do that. Okay, and that's it for the defender. Their logic was a lot simpler. All right, so now we just need to do the game management, and believe it or not, this is going to go pretty quick. This is probably the easiest part of this logic. So, when we get 3 outs, this counter is going to reach its target property, its target count of 3. And at that point, we need to switch, players need to switch sides. So, on this logic gate, new logic connection, when the target is reached, we're going to increment both of these counters over here by 1. Again, those counters are taking care of what happens during the inning. So new logic connection, when target is reached, we'll increment that counter. And I'll explain those counters in a moment. The other thing we want to do is let the player know that it's time to switch sides. So a new logic connection, when the target is reached, we come over to our sound effect generator, and under the general category, we're going to play the coach whistle. And that's it. Not much to do there. Now these two counters here keep track of what's going on in the inning. This one is for the top of the inning. This one is for the bottom of the inning. This one, the target count was set to 1. This one, the target count was set to 2. So the first time we record 3 outs, we increment each of these counters. This one immediately reaches its target count, which is set to 1, which means the top of the inning is over. And this is the counter that's marked on the logic diagrams labeled switch. Okay, so what happens when this counter reaches its target is the players switch sides. We're going to the bottom of the inning. So on here, new logic connection, when the target is reached, we want to come over to our batter ID logic gate and close that gate. All right? That means player 1, when the ball leaves this thing, player 1 isn't going to be allowed to run the bases, player 2 is. Okay? And that is all that this logic gate needs to do. It's pretty straightforward. Now this one handles what happens when we reach the end of the bottom of the inning. All right? So this is the end of the inning. This is marked on the logic diagrams as the inning end counter. So on this one, there's several things we want to do. A new logic connection, when the target is reached, we want to come back over to our batter ID logic gate and open that. because now batter 1 is batting again. And a new logic connection when the target is reached. The next thing we want to do is we're going to start this delay. And this time delayer is for resetting the inning, because the inning is over and we need to reset for the next inning. And that's what this does. This is labeled on the logic diagrams as the reset inning time delayer. So on this time delayer, a new logic connection, when the delay is completed, we want to reset both of these counters. New logic connection, when the delay is completed, we reset that one. Okay. Okay. The next thing this end of inning counter is going to do is a new logic connection when the target is reached. We're going to start that time delayer. And this one is really for a sound effect. So we're already playing the coach whistle when we reach the third out. And so 2 seconds later, we want to play a sound effect that lets the players know that the inning is over. So for that, we're going to do a new logic connection on this time delayer. When the delay is completed, we'll come over to our sound effect generator, and I'm going to play the musical charge. All right. And then the last thing we want to do with this counter is a new logic connection when the target is reached. We want to increment the counter for the number of innings by 1. All right. And this basically, once it reaches its target count, which by default is 9, we want to end the game. And again, so if you want to play just 1 inning, set this to 1. If you want to play 3 innings, you can set this to 3. Just changing this 1 counter before you start the challenge will determine how many innings you play. So on this counter, a new logic connection when that target is reached, we come over to our challenge maker and we complete the game. And that is all that that counter needs to do. Okay, so that takes care of that. Now there's one other thing here that I think I forgot, and I'm trying to figure out where that is. Because I need to reset this counter somewhere. No, I don't have to reset this one. That's right. Because I have the reset on target reached property set. So that's why we don't have to reset that one. Okay. So we're almost done. So on the challenge maker now, we're going to the challenge maker game ended logic diagram. There's a few things this needs to do. We've already handled the scoreboard. And I think we've already handled the case. Might be easier to look. But we want to input into this, I believe. Yeah, I did that on invites accepted. So we want to do the same thing on game ended. So on the challenge maker, a new logic connection when the game is ended. We want to make sure we input into our end of bat logic gate so that all of the logic gates at the bases are closed and all the radar markers are turned off. And that's necessary if the player aborts the game and decides to just stop playing. We want to make sure that those things are taken care of. Likewise, if the player aborts, we want to make sure we take the ball out of play. So a new logic connection on game ended. We'll go up to our falling object generator. Go down to the bottom and remove all. So if they start another game, we don't have a ball already sitting in there. All right, and then we want to turn off our repeater. So the soft cheering stops. And I believe that is it. I think that is everything that you need. I'm just double checking my diagrams. Yeah. And that's it for the logic of the game itself. But as I mentioned in the playthrough video, it's easy to lose track of where you are in the game when you're playing it. So next time I'll show you how to build the game board that keeps track of whose turn it is to bat, the number of outs, and the innings. Until then, I want to thank you for watching and sticking with me through these 2 long episodes. I hope you'll enjoy this baseball game on your own consoles if you choose to build this. Let me remind you again, if you are planning to build this, that I have logic diagrams on my blog that will really help you out. I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't normally reference the diagrams, you may want to this time. Again, the link is in the video description. Have a great day.